Welcome to Gleaning and Gathering. I'm your host, Eric Heimlich, and today I have a topic that has been brewing on my mind for quite a while that I want to share with you, and it is the topic of spiritual friendship. There's a book by that title that was written actually in the 1100s by a man named Aelred of Rievaulx. He was born in 1110, and his family had served in various positions in church leadership for generations. He was a steward to King David of Scotland, and he decided to leave court life and to become a monk. And so in 1134, he left Scotland and joined a Cistercian monastery at Rievaulx near Yorkshire in England. And he eventually wrote a book entitled Spiritual Friendship. He was a good friend of Bernard of Clairvaux and was an important Christian thinker in his century. This idea of spiritual friendship, he says, is a spiritual discipline. My friend Hank Voss took this spiritual classic and with an edited translation to make it updated and revised and more accessible, produced this spiritual classic in the Sacred Roots Spiritual Classic series. The idea of developing spiritual friendship is not just, I need to have good friends who are Christians, but it's deeper than that. And so he, in this book, outlines kind of 4 wise steps to develop spiritual friendship. And he talks about the difference between love and spiritual friendship. He says that Christians are called to love everyone, but that they can only be spiritual friends with a few. Really developing spiritual friendship means that we are first choosing spiritual friends, and he gives some kind of basic guidelines for choosing friends and some things that should help us know who not to choose. And then testing spiritual friends. And he goes through a process in this book that he talks about how we can test friends to make sure that the spiritual friend that we have chosen is truly someone who will be a help to our soul. And then accepting spiritual friendship is the third step. And then he has some really good things to say about enjoying spiritual friendship. And so it's been a help. It's developed, the book itself is developed as a conversation between friends. And there's the older Aelred who is speaking to a couple of younger friends there within this monastic community that he's part of. And it's really, it's been a help to me in thinking about friendship and spiritual friendship. Today we live in a day where we have lots of friends, supposedly. On Facebook, I haven't checked lately, but somewhere around 4,400 friends, I think, is what I've got there. People that I've seen different places, met different places, people that are friends in a very, very cursory sort of way. And some of them deeper than that. But to really be able to develop spiritual friendship is something, unfortunately, that I'm afraid that many people are missing today. To be able to develop a deep relationship that has Christ at the center. And that's really how he develops this idea of spiritual friendship. One quote that I love, he says, "Here we are, you and I hope that Christ makes a third with us." And this picture of Jesus being present where 2 or 3 are gathered and being in the midst, being between us, being in that relationship. In that, there's a place of great joy and peace and safety, and that there is at the center of this relationship a picture of Jesus present with his people. And unfortunately, there are a lot of relationships that's not the case. Because of our brokenness, because of where we've been, and because of where we feel like that we may need others. Many times when we come to a relationship, we come with baggage and we come with a sense of neediness, and Christ is not at the center of it. Instead, it is, I need you, and because I need you, I'm going to hold on to you. And really, we are at the center of it. And there's a sense of selfishness where our needs and the things that we need or we think we need from this relationship really are at the center of it all. And so when you look at Christian love in 1 Corinthians 13, does that really describe the kinds of relationship that we have with our friends? Or is it really all about us? Learning to be friends with God and with one another really is at the heart of this idea of spiritual friendship. It's both. It's me growing in relationship with God, but then also in relationship with a very small circle of people who are watching for my soul, who are spiritual guardians for our heart. And that's not something that you can have with 4,300 Facebook friends. That's not probably something that you can even have with a group of 150 people or 50 people at your church. There may be a small group of 2 or 3 in an entire lifetime that may really be able to, at a deep level, know you and be in that kind of relationship. Richard Evans, a great writer, wrote a book called The Four Doors. In reading it recently, I grabbed a line from it and wrote it down and put it on my vision board, because this is something that I want to come back to again and again. He writes, "To be of value to others is a far greater ambition than the vain hope for the world's fleeting applause and fickle admiration. In the end, it is better to be loved by one person who knows your soul than a million people who don't even know your phone number." In this day of social media, this idea that if I get 100 likes, or if I get 50 likes, or if I get 10 likes on whatever it is that I've put out there, then wow, that's a good day. But to really be known at a soul level, that takes a lot more than just putting out whatever it is that you happen to be thinking about on social media. And are we cultivating that? Are we cultivating those kinds of relationships where we are loved by one person who knows our soul? Because those kinds of relationships take time, they take focus, they take vulnerability, they take the kinds of cultivation and care that is not scalable. You can't have 4,300 of those. But I think that that's the need today. Spiritual friendship, really investing in those kinds of key relationships and becoming vulnerable and accessible and continuing to develop those over the course of a lifetime really is a spiritual discipline. You know, there's some people that are just not going to be able to be that. You know, Aelred in his book invites us to choose to prioritize spiritual friendship in our schedules and our ministry priorities. You know, to be a good steward of time and energy means that there are some things that you're going to have to say no to if you're going to truly say yes to others. If we desire to build spiritual friendships, then there are other things that we're going to need to let go of. And so I would challenge you to think about your life and think about where you're at. I don't have the exact quote, but I read an article recently about how there's been a decline in the overall mental health and well-being of pastors as they're self-reporting. And over 66% said that they feel lonely and that they do not have anyone who is a close friend. And you know, I know in the books on pastoral administration, it taught us when I was in college, you know, pastors don't need to get close to, or should not endeavor to get close to, their parishioners, because that's going to lead to problems. You need to maintain this aloofness, this sense of independent disconnection from your congregation. You're the leader, and you don't need to get too involved. And so, if that's where you are, and these are the people that you have relationships with, and yet you don't have anyone that you're truly close to, it's going to lead to that sense of aloneness. I've experienced that, and I've met a lot of other pastor leader friends that have confessed to that as well. I don't think it's just a pastor thing. I think that really to develop this kind of deep friendship at a soul level is challenging for everyone. It takes time, but it also takes intention. You're going to have to really make time for it if it's going to happen. It's not something that's just demanding, I need to do this. And so it just doesn't get done. And unless someone walks in and says, hey, I really need a spiritual friend, could you be that for me? To really develop that is just not something that you may have the opportunity for. And so you're not really quite sure where to go about finding it. So I think that this idea of spiritual friendship is something that we all recognize is important. Yes, it's good. It would be beautiful to have. But it's kind of on a level that I may or may never have this. But if I do, que sera, sera. It's not going to happen necessarily because I was intentional about it. And I get that. I really do. But I also know that if we approached other spiritual disciplines in that way, we probably would never become spiritually disciplined. If we approached our Bible reading, I'm just going to see how it goes. Or we approached our prayer time, I'm going to see how it goes. We have to make time for it. And then we have to follow through on it. And so there's some action that has to happen on our part if it's going to take place. A spiritual friendship is like that. It's going to have to take intention, choice, follow through. I want to encourage you to begin developing spiritual friendships with someone who can be a soul guardian. A few years ago, I read the book A Resilient Life, and I've referenced it here by Gordon MacDonald. If you haven't read it, I just encourage you again to find a copy and read it. In the 5th section of that book, he writes, resilient people run in the company of a happy few. And the 4 areas that he has in that section are: they learn the value of lingering, they avoid the peril of the solitary life, they know how friendship works, and they seek a certain kind of people. And what he's talking about is spiritual friendship, really. But he asks the question in talking about this idea of the happy few, which comes from William Shakespeare's The Life of King Henry V. A band of brothers, we few, we happy few. It's an idea that he lifts and then uses throughout this section of the book. But he asks the question, who are the people who populate that inner circle that presumably will walk through life with each of us and who will make an inestimable contribution to the development of our resilient life? He writes later, most Christian leadership is exercised by people who do not know how to develop healthy, intimate relationships and have opted for power and control instead. Many Christian empire builders have been people unable to give and receive love. He writes later that the faith taught to so many of us is a faith of individualism. It centers heavily on a transaction between Jesus and me, and it rarely focuses on the idea of Jesus and us. Developing relationships takes time. In this section on the perils of a solitary life, he points out that one of the things that's important for developing these kinds of deep relationships is lingering. He writes, we are tempted to think that a conversation is not substantial if it doesn't have something to do with repairing someone's broken life or rebuilding his or her priorities. This is a simple trap to fall into, and it makes one feel superior and significant. I know. I feel as if I lived this way for a number of years in my early adulthood, and I assumed that this was the way God's work was done. It felt good to drive home at the end of an evening and say, well, it's been a wonderful night of ministry, but these were all one-way associations. And he talks about how that the woman or man who cannot afford to feel weakness, who has a need to be right, and always has to have things under control, under their personal control, will likely have few, if any, intimate friends. To have that kind of intimacy means that, there has to be the willingness to, I'll use this phrase, waste time, in quotes, if you can see the quotes. Waste time by lingering. I remember early on in our ministry in Indianapolis, I met weekly with Marcos, our Hispanic pastor, and we would have these long meetings, sometimes 3-4 hours long, where he would talk about stories from his childhood and growing up in Guatemala and all sorts of just relational details. And as a American, I'll be honest, I struggled with some of those conversations because I felt like, what's the point? There wasn't a point in terms of an action point, a point that I could take and say, okay, we can use this next Sunday or do something about that this week. It was just lingering. It was just being together and hearing his heart. But later on, when there were challenges, and there were deep, deep challenges in ministry there, I was so thankful for the deep relationship that we had and the trust that had been developed in those times of lingering, because it was that trust that had been developed through just being together and taking time and sharing at a heart level that held us united and together when we didn't always agree, and when there were things that were very difficult that needed to be dealt with. A careful study of the Bible, MacDonald says, will lead one to realize how many of us are not adequately taught when we're young that the Bible is about relationships and that no one is a complete human being apart from the context of those relationships. Jesus himself is a great example of this. And in his life, there's the multitude. There's the 70. There's the 12. There's 3. And then there's John. There are these concentric circles, but there is deep, deep relationship. This is not a discipleship class that Jesus was teaching one day a week. This is life together. It's in the company of that happy few that we are much more likely to hear God speak the truth that we need to hear. And if we're not in those relationships, those kind of iron on iron sharpening relationships, there are going to be blind spots and places that we are not going to hear or see the things that we need to, because we just don't see it, and there's no one else close enough to us to help us to see it. In the kind of happy few relationship that we're talking about, I'm talking about a place where there's genuine fun together, where when we come together, there's just rich sharing and a beautiful picture of God's grace and just joy. And I'm thankful that I have experienced that. My life is richer because of it. There's a quote in this book, The Resilient Life. He says, there are certain people we meet to whom we feel we can talk because they have such a deep capacity for hearing, not hearing words only, but hearing us as a person. Seeking that level of intimacy is something that I find that there are a lot of leaders that recoil from. I want to ask you the question, who coaches you, who stretches your mind, who listens to and encourages your dreams? Who is it that is helping to watch for your soul? Who's protecting you? Who are those that are going to share in your tears? Who are those who are going to rebuke you? And who among your happy few is going to enjoy life together with you? Who is it that seeks God with you? Who is it that's close to your heart? And who enables you to be as you've never been before? Who is it? Developing those kinds of relationships, friends, is a spiritual discipline. And it's not going to happen like just falling off a log. It's just not going to happen without intentionality and without cultivation and without a real plan and some purposefulness on your part. But it's absolutely essential. I really think it's essential for everyone, but I think it's especially essential for those in leadership. There is a very real enemy who's doing everything that he can to take down anyone, but especially and particularly Christian leaders. We need people who have developed spiritual friends and are not just going out into battle alone as spiritual lone rangers, thinking that they can do this by themselves, but people who have cultivated deep relationships, and that in those relationships they have a band of brothers, they have a happy few that for them are the spiritual friends that they will walk the road to heaven with. And I want to encourage you, friends, that if you have not developed those already, that you would spend time doing that. One of the things that's been encouraging to me, and each year for the past few years I've made time in my life for it, and that is Men of Integrity. It's a gathering that happens in Mendon, Ohio. Lots of guys from lots of different backgrounds coming together. Normally starts on Thursday, ends on Saturday around noon. But it's a great group. They always have great speakers, great time, great fellowship, great fun. But there's a particular kind of guy, I'll say, that ends up there. And I'll say this because I'm part of that group, and I've been there, I think, for the last, 8 or 9 years. They're guys who are broken and who know they are broken and who are willing to, in their need, reach out to others who are in need as well and be together. And what I've found interesting is that, there's some great speakers that we've had over the years. But there are a number of speakers that will come and speak, but they don't prioritize being there as a participant. And I don't criticize them. I'm sure they've got lots of things to do. But the need for those kind of leaders to have some place in their life that they're connecting at a deep level to others who are broken and where they themselves are being vulnerable is necessary. But I guess the thing that I've recognized is that there are some people at certain levels that feel like that they're maybe above needing it. And again, I don't know. I'm not trying to criticize, because they may be finding that in other places and in other groups and in other ways, and that's great. But I think that there can be a sense of reaching a certain place where, I'm beyond this. I don't need it anymore. But nothing could be further from the truth. Because of depravity and because of where we are in a fallen world, wherever you are, the higher you go, the more of a target you have on your back, and the greater degree to which we should be wanting the kind of accountability and spiritual friendship that will help protect us from those blind spots. Because if we're not careful, we end up in a place where the only people who are speaking into our lives are the people who are telling us the things that they are getting paid to tell us. And we're not hearing the truth anymore. We are believing our own press. We are hearing the propaganda. But that's it. There's an echo chamber. And the disparate voices, we're not hearing them. Proverbs chapter 9, I was reflecting on that recently, and the truth there, that our response to criticism is our response to wisdom. It says that if you reprove a mocker, he will hate you. But if you reprove a wise person, he will love you. And that response to criticism is a revealer of the character that's already there. Are we a wise person? Are we willing to embrace those things and those people that care enough about us to tell us the truth? And are we allowing them access at a soul level so that we can hear the things that we need to hear? You've heard the stories, and I have too. And I don't care if I ever hear another one again, of leaders who seemingly everything's going fine and then it's not. And they crash and they burn. And everyone gathers around the wreckage and talks about it and dissects it. And yet, who was there? At a soul level, who was asking the right questions? Who was helping them through it? And too often it's only evident after the fact, but the warning signs were there all the way along. I want to encourage you to develop spiritual friendships. I guess that's my heart in this, because it is so vitally important. John Wesley said Christianity knows nothing of a solitary religion. And friends, we need each other. But not only do we just need each other in a general way, we need spiritual friends who will be guardians of our soul and who will help us towards God and who will love us enough to tell us the truth and have permission and access to be able to do that. So wherever you're at in this, I just want to encourage you today to either continue on the road or begin the process of really developing spiritual friendships. For Gleaning and Gathering, God bless.